Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Big Bros podcast. Welcome if it's your first time joining us on the show. My name is Jeremy, and I'm joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Ilan. How you going, mate?
I'm pretty good, bro. How are you?
I'm well. I'm excited to dive into this one, mate. Emotional intelligence and emotional maturity is the name of the game today. It's one that I feel like I've grappled with over the last couple years, especially really tried to get better in, and have found myself getting better at it, which is a good thing. And I've definitely noticed the improvements in my life around it from it. So I'm keen to dive into it, keen to talk about, what emotional maturity means and how to develop it, how to get better in it, still getting better at it, but have been getting better at it. And I think a lot of you guys listening will take a lot away from it today, hopefully. So what does emotional maturity mean to you, mate? And I guess why is it important as guys that we develop this from the youngest age possible?
Well, you flipped the script because I was going to literally ask you the same thing. But to me, emotional maturity is the ability to not only be self-aware of your own emotions, but the emotions of others and the people around you. So what they're expressing, what they're feeling. So they call this emotional EQ or intelligence, emotional intelligence. So the ability to kind of understand and survey your surroundings. And I think it's a very crucial thing, especially for young men to develop, because it's just one part of your personality arsenal, isn't it? Right? Because at the end of the day, you might be a very academic individual who's quite smart, but then you might be quite robotic and you might not be too self-aware of, your emotions, other people's emotions. And what we know about social relationships is that everything is developed off emotion, right? The reason you're friends with certain individuals is because of how they make you feel and how you make them feel. And part of developing healthy relationships is nurturing a healthy emotional relationship between both you and that person. So I think a lot of emotional intelligence also comes to play when it comes to relationships as well. We hear a lot about how, at least from a male's perspective, a lot of girls look for a guy who is very self-aware in what they want and who they are, but more specifically, someone who's not afraid to express their emotions, albeit in healthy ways. So I think that's what it means to me. But something I just want to touch on as well, and I think the reason it's such a important thing to emphasize, especially now, is that traditionally men have been really seen as these stoic types who don't acknowledge their emotions, who don't almost believe in acknowledging it. And, to be vulnerable was a sign of emotional weakness. So to develop something like your emotional maturity is something that has kind of been swept under the rug for a lot of men, I think, over a lot of generations. But I think the good thing about actually addressing it now and letting men develop their EQ is the fact that, it's one tool in their arsenal. Because what do we see? I'm going to ask you this. What's the consequences of not being emotionally mature as a man?
Becoming probably very reactive in your responses and not knowing what it is you're feeling when you're feeling it and how it makes you feel. As convoluted as that sounds, it's basically the inability to recognize what you're feeling. Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling happy right now? How is this making you feel? And therefore, how are you going to respond to it? Because if you can't recognize the emotion you're feeling first, you're not going to be able to respond in a practical and logical way, are you? And this is what's going to set you up in all of your relationships, be it romantically, be it just in your friendships, platonically, whatever it may be, at work, in your job. You need to be really good at knowing what things feel like and therefore how to respond to it. I think for me personally, this is something that I got really better in just through my career. Studying physiotherapy, you're around people all the time. You have to get really good at talking to people and understanding what people are feeling and empathizing with them as well in order to get a good outcome both for you and them. But this takes time. Like, my course was 4 years and this is now my first year working full time in the industry. And if you think about it like that, that's 5 years of proper developing emotional intellect with people, with strangers from all walks of life. It takes a solid amount of time. And I'm not there yet. I'm just better than what I was 5 years ago because I've put in 5 years worth of reps, essentially. It's just like building a muscle in the gym. You're building your brain capacity in a way here. So it's the same thing. And I just wish or hope that schools nowadays find a way to develop this in young people, because yes, there's an element of just going through life and experiencing things in life and developing your emotional intellect based on your experiences and your friendships and your fallouts and whatever it may be. But surely there's a way that it can be developed earlier in early teens nowadays in schools. I just hope there is. Do you reckon that there's or rather, have you seen anything happening nowadays for the younger generation to start developing and having these conversations earlier rather than just waiting till they get into their 20s?
I'd like to think so. I think there's been a little bit of progress with it. I mean, when we were both in school, I don't think we ever really had massive or major emphasis and workshops on how to actually develop your emotional intelligence. I think a lot of it starts with actually outlining the consequences of what happens if you don't develop into someone who's emotionally mature. Because for me, when I think of someone who isn't emotionally mature, I think of the consequences, which in their case could be bottling up emotions, to suppressing really difficult things, which means that if you're not even aware of what you're feeling and you're suppressing all these things, you can develop maladaptive behaviors. So, whether that's drugs or alcohol, whether that's engaging in violence because you haven't processed your emotions. I think that all starts with someone who was never made or taught how to know what they're feeling and understanding. And second to that, as I said before, it's knowing what other people are experiencing. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of room for schools and maybe for our educational sectors to develop workshops. And it could be as simple as just like outlining the benefits that emotional maturity can have on you, because it makes you more happy. I mean, no one has ever felt upset by by having clarity. It's the lack of clarity in one's emotions that tends to contribute to a whole sort of, mental health issues, right? But when you know what you're feeling, even if it's a negative emotion, you can at least acknowledge, hey, I'm feeling sad in this moment in time. You at least have clarity, and then you know how to move forward. I think schools would be of great benefit if they started teaching young men, especially, this specific trait. So it could start as simply as, asking men how to track their own emotions. It could be things like activity trackers. You see it a lot in psychology therapy sessions where you'll get someone who might be feeling depressed or anxious, more specifically with someone with depression. And in order for them to actually identify how they're feeling after an activity, they'll get them to do something they enjoy, whether it's playing sport, going to the gym, cooking, could be anything. And they'll get them to rank their emotion out of 10, asking them how they're feeling. Because the thing is, if you don't rank it after that moment in time, you kind of have a convoluted understanding of what you were actually feeling. But by, let's say, going to the gym, you said, okay, far out, I feel good. I'm going to say 8 out of 10. You put those reps in, someone will become way more understanding of what they're feeling in that moment in time. And the good thing there is that there's a bit of a relationship that happens when you start becoming aware of what you're feeling on the inside and becoming aware of your own emotions, you tend to pick it up in others. So another thing that schools should actually do is stuff on body language education. I've been a massive advocate for schools educating young people on body language, and not just, with male to female relationships, but more specifically male to male, female to female, because there is so much information that is revealed through non-communication, through aspects that aren't actually communicated within verbal information. What do you reckon?
I completely agree. I think when I think of it from my perspective, in school, the best teachers for me were the ones that, one, were really calm in their responses. And I think calm demeanor is what you kind of mean there by body language as well. When you have those figures in front of you that are relaxed, calm, they don't feel like they're stoic creatures that are going to, absolutely annihilate you for getting something wrong or for stuffing up along the way in whatever that may be. Those are the figures that stand out to me. And that's what I wanted to be when I took a gap year and went on Camp America. I was 19 years old, went to America, was a camp counselor for 12-year-old boys specifically, but there was like 500 kids on this campsite, big campsite. And I thought this was a brilliant opportunity for me to obviously grow personally in terms of my emotional maturity and how I am with people, especially those younger, but also an opportunity to bring out the best in younger kids as well. Because I thought back to when I was that age, and, you know, the people that really stood out to me when I was that young were the ones that were a little bit older than me, but I could feel like I could really resonate with. And that's what I wanted to be for these kids. And the way in which I went about this was because, you know, kids are funny. They're not going to give you the respect that you feel like you deserve from the get-go. You need to earn that respect. It's just like earning your stripes in a football team. Nobody deserves to give you respect unless they really see that you're worthy of getting their respect and trust. So what did I do? I really just focused on being a friend to the kid more than anything else, being someone that they could talk smack to and, you know, talk to about their days, and whether that was nonsense or whether that was like stuff that was a bit more profound. I just wanted to feel like I could get on their level more than anything. I didn't want to be seen as someone that was higher than them, more superior than them. I first wanted to get on their level. But you have to do that with caution as well, because you don't want them to take advantage of you, right? You don't want the kid to feel like they can just get away with murder and everything's going to be okay, and because they know that Jeremy's not going to get them in trouble, or not trouble, but they know that Jeremy's just not going to, you know, have anything to say to something that goes the adverse way. So what I did then was getting them on their level means giving them a voice more than anything else. So when stuff actually didn't go their way, and say there were these kids that were getting in trouble, and there were a few that stood out and they were quite notorious for it. And this was a brilliant opportunity, I felt, for me to bring the best out of these kids that were notoriously known for getting in trouble and being quite disobedient. I just wanted to give these kids more of a voice than anything else. I wanted to have them come sit next to me, and rather than me telling them right from wrong, actually hear what they had to say from their perspective. And through them talking, they could actually lash out their emotions and talk about their feelings, what they felt, how that situation made them feel. And more often than not, just by me sitting there with them and maybe asking some probing questions, that allowed them to actually just recognize the emotions they were feeling, and therefore recognize what was right and what was wrong in that period of time, in that situation. And then they would feel so much better for it, because they were just given an opportunity to talk about things, rather than sit next to a guy that is 10 years older than them, who is telling them, don't do this or else X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And that was such a pivotal moment in my life for developing my emotional intellect and maturity, in knowing just that the key thing is just giving someone a voice, listening to them. That's the biggest thing you can do, as well as developing emotional maturity in others. So this is why I think it's something I'm so passionate about.
No, look, I really like that story, because what you've done there essentially is balance being an authority figure, because you're a counselor at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you used the aspect of empathy, which is a massive indicator of one's ability to become emotionally mature. How does one leverage their skill of empathy? Because not only did you get them in trouble, you didn't get them in trouble, but what did you want to do? You wanted to empower them and maybe give them a voice and ask them, why were you acting out in the way you were? Is this something that you haven't been able to communicate in an adaptive way? And perhaps you're screaming out for someone to listen to you. And that's usually what it takes, because empathy allows you to see where the other person is coming from. And sometimes it's very difficult to train that skill of empathy, especially when you're dealing with someone, and it doesn't have to be a kid that you're supervising on a camp, but it could be a friend. But it's hard to look at someone and relate to them when they say something that's quite maladaptive. It could be quite rude, because it takes a lot of kind of patience to be like, okay, I know you said something really disruptive or maladaptive, but what do you actually mean by that? Is there something beneath the surface here? Maybe you're feeling upset and angry. Maybe people aren't listening to you. What's underneath all of that? And I think that's a really, really crucial step, because if you want to improve your emotional maturity, becoming more empathetic is a massive indicator. What else do you reckon helps?
Well, that is the key point that you mentioned there, is that I truly don't believe that anyone is innately toxic and malicious. I don't think you're born a malicious figure. I think people commit, bad acts because of stuff that's happened to them and stuff that they've gone through themselves. And they've, maybe never been given the opportunity to voice that, to be heard. They feel misunderstood. And, it's another example is being on the roads and coming across really bad drivers with bad road rage that will have any opportunity to toot their horn and wind down their window and yell and shout at you. It's another example there that maybe that person has so much pent up anger, pent up frustration, that their fuse is so short compared to someone else's that is quite big, because they've never been maybe given the opportunity to just be heard and be listened to, and they feel quite misunderstood. So that's the exact scenario here with, kids, for example, or with friends, whichever it is. Emotional maturity is understanding that, you're not better than this person, but you're willing to not, one, take things personally from what they say from the get-go, unless it's like a repeat offender and maybe they're doing it over a long period of time and you've given chance for them to actually explain themselves. But if you're prepared to, burst out back at them the second that they're bursting back out at you, you're no more mature than they are, really. So I think sitting with what is going on, trying to actually converse about it, being really relaxed about it, is the best thing you can do. And that's emotional maturity to a T, in my opinion. But that's not always going to go your way. And that's important to recognize, that you can try be calm and that might actually trigger them even more. But then that you've done the best thing you can do, that you've dealt with it in the best way you possibly can.
The question that's always helped nurture my own sense of emotional maturity is that whenever I am in any sort of interaction, I always ask myself, what does this person need from me in this moment right now? Because what that does is it removes the focus of what maybe I need or I want, and sure, it might be valid. But if you want to train yourself to become way more cognizant of other people and what they want in that moment in time, it's by asking yourself that question. Because what you'll come up with is basic answers like, well, they probably want me to listen to them. They probably want me to validate them. And they probably either want me to be a good partner or a friend to them in this moment. And it's hard to ask that question to yourself, especially when you're going through your own shit. But gee, it's a very powerful one if you want to improve the ability to, improve your relationships. And then we spoke about kids earlier as well, about how they sometimes don't know the healthiest way, especially adolescent boys, to express their anger or their discomfort. And a good example here as well is that kids will model their behaviors based off their parents. So if a child has been brought up in an environment where their parents scream at each other and that's the way they express their, uncomfortable emotions, that's what the child will see as appropriate forms of communication, especially when they're upset. They've learned that if they scream, they will get something for it. So if you've never been taught healthy ways of communicating and healthy ways of relating to other people, you set your children up for failure. And look, I'm not a parent, but this is what I guess the evidence base says when it comes to modeling theory. So I think it's very cool, because I'm still kind of thinking and reflecting about your examples with the camp, which is probably shows a testament to how you were raised as well, because it shows that you were raised in a family where you can express emotions and in a very healthy way without necessarily feeling as though that you can't, say what you want in an unhealthy way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, at the same time, I also do think that whilst your upbringing is really important and pivotal to how you then treat other people in terms of your emotional intellect, I do also think that it is something that you can just get better in and train yourself regardless of your upbringing.
Sorry to interrupt you. I completely agree with you. I just thought that's an important point, because it may have sounded like an excuse before that if you have been brought up in an environment where you're set up to fail because you haven't been taught adaptive ways of communication. But yes, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can train yourself to get really good at this skill. And the earlier you do it, especially as a guy, because I think that it is probably more of a natural feminine quality to be quite calm and collected in terms of your feeling of emotions. I think women feel emotions more than guys do, just in terms of our biology makeup and in terms of our hormonal differences. That's the word I'm trying to get at. I think, it's quite a feminine trait to really feel emotions quite deeper. And I think the earlier we can start to do that as men, we'll be better for it.
I disagree with you. Men and women will face and experience the same amount of emotional discomfort. Women are just much better at processing it.
Okay, well,
on average.
That's what I mean. More so like the processing of it,
got you.
the processing of it, and the feeling of it. So that brings me to my next question. I think, how do you get better at developing emotional maturity as a young man? What are the 3 key steps that you would do?
Empathy is the one.
How do you develop that?
You develop empathy by asking the question I asked before, which is, if you're in an interaction with someone, you ask yourself, what does this person need from me in this moment in time? And I know you asked me for the 3 things, but I think I should bring in an example. Let's say you're with your girlfriend, right? And they've come
to you. The girlfriend I don't have.
The girlfriend you don't have, but you'll have many more, I'm sure, in your lifetime.
Hopefully not many.
And they come to you and they've had a bad day at work and they've gotten into a fight with their boss or a colleague, and the masculine part of your brain is searching for a solution, because you see problem, you see solution. And your girlfriend is upset and she just wants to share what she's feeling with you in that moment in time. What are the 2 options you can go down?
Give a solution.
Yep, that's option 1.
Or just listen to them.
Okay. By listening to them, you're pursuing option 2. And option 2 would most likely be following the principle of, what does this person in front of me need right now? So they need someone who holds space for them. They need someone to validate them. And they need someone who shows them unconditional positive regard. What that means is you're not going to be providing them a solution, because by providing a solution, it almost feels like you're so uncomfortable with their discomfort that you just want to throw out a textbook, how to make this better, so you can get rid of that discomfort. By doing the former, though, you allow yourself to sit with them, and that builds an element of validation, builds an element of safety for this person, and it allows you to become more in tune with what they're feeling at that time as well. So you're being empathetic, you're asking us that question of, what do they need from me right now? And the benefit of that as well is that you learn and you train yourself to be a better communicator, because that person, your girlfriend, let's say in this hypothetical example, will thank you for it, right? Because a lot of times she might not want a solution. Sure, she probably knows a solution realistically, but she just wants to be heard in her discomfort. And it doesn't just go for women. Like, for guys as well, it can happen as well, where like, I might know the solution, but I just want to share what's happened to me. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a big problem. Like, we spoke about this before, and I want to get your opinion on this. When something tragic happens, you mentioned to me earlier, the worst thing you should say to them is, I'm sorry that happened. Can you explain?
Yeah, I think, well, just for the context here, say for example, like someone's just experienced a really bad loss, family loss, or someone has just been diagnosed with a really bad illness or sinister, whatever it is. I've just always felt uncomfortable with responding to that person by saying, I'm sorry to hear. I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. Because I just feel like if I was to hear that from someone, like if that was me in their shoes and someone just says like, I'm sorry to hear that, I feel like I'm already distanced from that person. I feel like that person is kind of othering me in a way, that they are sorry for me, but they're not in my position, so it doesn't really affect them. But they're more so just upset to hear that. Like it doesn't really feel like we're connected in that moment. And I've always thought like, well, what is a better way to respond? How can I respond in a way that is going to make the person not necessarily feel better, because you're not always going to make someone feel better, but at least just feel heard and understood by me. I think that's the key thing. And, like I've asked this question to people that I work with as well, like just being in the healthcare industry, in the medical industry. And, you know, my boss said something to me, which was probably the best response I've heard so far, is to maybe try converse with them when they actually tell you something. So rather than having that blanket statement like, I'm sorry to hear, and then waiting for the conversation to go elsewhere, maybe say like, okay, well, how are you feeling right now? How is that person going? Are they getting the necessary treatment? So try to like make a conversation about it. So for example, if we are using like a cancer diagnosis as an example, like someone has just told you that they've been diagnosed with something, or someone they know of has been diagnosed with this, maybe rather than saying, I'm sorry to hear that, this is just my opinion, I feel like responding in a way like, okay, well, have they been actually, you know, getting the necessary treatment that they need? Are they taking the right steps that's been, you know, instructed to them? Do they have enough support around them? I think those types of questions show actual genuine care, because you're thinking about the person holistically. You're not just thinking about the diagnosis. You're thinking about the person more than the diagnosis, and you're creating conversation around it. And, you know, that person will respond to you and they'll say, you know, yes, this is happening. Yes, this isn't happening, but it will happen. And that's when you can say like, that's really good to hear. I'm really happy to hear that this is happening for them and they're getting the supports that they need or the care that they need. So you've just turned a situation that is quite sad and quite upsetting into one that's actually reinforcing positivity and encouragement in the situation, and building a connection and trust between you and the person you're talking to. And I think that's the best way to respond, rather than just the I'm sorry to hear statement, because like I said, I think that just others the person in a way. What do you think?
I mean, I agree with you to a certain extent, because I can see how saying, you know, I'm sorry this has happened, it can be quite othering. Where I might digress and diverge from use maybe your solution, which is like asking them questions on end. Because I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to show genuine interest. You know, you're asking questions that are really relevant, and it shows that you're listening. So your active listening skills are there, and your genuine interest and curiosity is there, which is really effective for building your emotional maturity. I think I'm just a nitpicky person, but I'd probably just think, I personally shy away from saying, you know, I'm sorry that's happened to you. But I usually just reinforce what they say, which is, oh my God, that's terrible. Like, I don't know what to say for you. This is really, really tragic. How are you holding up?
Yeah, well, there you go. Like the how are you holding up? I think that's the same thing in a way.
Sure. And I think that's probably quite effective. So maybe not using othering language in that sort of context is quite helpful and effective. But I think genuinely, if you follow the principles that we mentioned before, which is empathy, so asking what does this person need from me right now, showing genuine curiosity, active listening, you're going to be best prepared to improve your own emotional maturity skills. And the truth of the matter is, if you are guided by these first level principles through many instances in life, you will develop your emotional maturity. Even doing that activity tracker I said before, if you're someone who struggles with getting clear with what they feel, writing it down really helps, because thoughts in our head are so abstract, but when you put them onto paper, it's there and you feel more clear. So those would be the things that I would probably recommend.
Does your emotional intelligence and the way in which you go about practicing it differ between a relationship versus a friendship?
No, I wouldn't think so, right? Like, you want to be genuine and authentic in all your relationships. So I can't see why you'd want to modify how you behave in one context versus the others, especially with your friends and your partner. Like, sure, they're different relationship dynamics, but are you going to, stop being empathetic for your partner, but be more empathetic for your friends, or show more curiosity with your partner and less for your friends? Like, you want to keep them consistent, because that's the only way you develop that skill.
Absolutely. So I think for a closing message, I think it's important as guys from a young age, it's just about putting in the reps. Really just put in the reps with your emotional intellect. Get good at talking to a diverse amount of different people, whether that's just going up to random people, you know, on a night out and like just creating chat, or, you know, being in a group scenario and talking to people that maybe you're not used to talking to. If you can get good at just talking to a bunch of different people, you will build this trait up naturally. You will start to pick up on different ways to respond to people. And the best ways to respond to people, firstly, is just by listening. So actually just shutting your mouth, listening to them, and reiterating maybe some of the things that they're saying. And that's going to build your emotional intelligence whatsoever, regardless of who it is or what you're talking about.
And just quick thing to add there, different people, diverse people, and diverse experiences will also help, because it'll challenge you in more ways than you know, and that will only help your emotional maturity.
Excellent. Completely agree. So guys, if you've taken anything away from this episode, we hope you've really enjoyed it, and you are willing to share it with those that you feel like can take some things away from it as well.
And if you're enjoying the podcast as of late, we would so appreciate a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really just reaffirms to us what we're doing. And, you know, Jeremy and I, we've done this now for 60 something odd episodes, and we're loving it, and we're doing it for you guys. So if you want to show your appreciation, why not just rate us the 5 stars?
We'd love to hear from you. So on that note, guys, have a happy Tuesday, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.